Andres, can you share your screen?
Okay. Dear friends of the Pastoral Logotherapy, I am Dr. Andres Kuplen and greeting from Uruguay, South America. Today, I want to reflect on the importance of cultivating the inner world to put the best of our existence and the service of humanity. Excuse me, I will give my presentation in my original language, Spanish. The images you will see are translated by Google Translator so that you can follow the idea of the presentation. I hope you can excuse this methodology. Welcome and thank you for your time. Queridos amigos, amigas, es un gusto para mí poder encontrarme con ustedes en la edición número 24 del Congreso Mundial de Logoterapia y Análisis Existencial. Quiero compartirles hoy un intercambio de saberes, una charla en la que podamos reflexionar por unos instantes en este tiempo de puentes que propone el Instituto Viktor Frankl de Viena, poder comenzar a pensar en el cuidado del alma como un puente para una vida con sentido. Es muy importante en este tiempo que vivimos
Viktor Frankl de Viena poder comenzar pensa en el cuidado de el alma como un puente para una vida con sentido. A talk in which we can reflect for a few moments.
Considero importante en este tiempo que estamos viviendo que podamos tener una idea clara de quién es el ser humano para nosotros. Hay personas que pueden definir al ser humano como un mono lampiño que trepó en la escala zoológica hasta convertirse en el Homo sapiens sapiens. Hay personas que definen al ser humano como el animal que tropieza 2 veces con la misma piedra. Hay personas que definen al ser humano como una chispa divina o como una llama de lo trascendente. Lo cierto es que así como definimos al ser humano, así lo tratamos. Así como definimos al ser humano, así nos tratamos a nosotros mismos. La Organización Mundial de la Salud define al ser humano como un ser físico, mental y social, definiendo salud como el bienestar físico, mental y social. La Organización Mundial de la Salud y el mundo todo ignora o no toma en cuenta una de las dimensiones más importantes del ser humano, la dimensión de lo específicamente humano, la dimensión espiritual, la dimensión que sabemos desde la logoterapia nunca enferma. La propia Organización Mundial de la Salud celebró el 10 de octubre el Día Internacional de Prevención en Salud Mental. Yo me pregunto, y le pregunto a todos ustedes, ¿podrá haber salud mental sin sentido de vida? ¿Podrá haber salud mental sin razones por o para las cuales vivir? Una persona que desconoce cuál es el sentido de su vida no solo es infeliz, sino que también es incapaz de vivir. Eso nos lo dice Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, en 1980, nos hace una invitación importante. Hablando a un auditorio que estaba escuchando su conferencia, comienza diciendo: señoras y señores, la logoterapia todavía no existe. Yo solo he intentado poner los cimientos. Ahora les toca a ustedes construirla y deberían ser independientes al determinarlos. Con esto Frankl nos dijo que la logoterapia es una escuela abierta a su propia evolución. Podríamos decir que la logoterapia le habla al eterno corazón del hombre y la mujer. En todo tiempo histórico, la logoterapia va a poder ayudar a dar respuesta a la pregunta que la vida nos venga haciendo en el presente y en el futuro, tal vez como nos ayudó en el pasado. Es importante entonces habilitar espacios que ayuden al ser humano hoy a dar respuesta a las preguntas que la vida nos está poniendo hoy. En 1980, Frankl nos plantea que la logoterapia, al venir existiendo, se va construyendo día a día con la labor, con el trabajo de todos los logoterapeutas. Sabemos que la logoterapia es una teoría. La logoterapia es una psicoterapia, pero también podemos afirmar que la logoterapia es una filosofía para la vida. Vale decir que es posible vivir un modo de ser en el mundo logoterapéutico. Es posible vivir un modo de ser en el mundo basado en la búsqueda de sentido, basado en la búsqueda de valores, basado en la creatividad, en el amor, en el humor, basado en la capacidad de perdonarnos, de perdonar, de pedir perdón, basándonos en la capacidad de descubrir la riqueza después de haber atravesado un sufrimiento, la capacidad de reconocer la muerte como una forma de abrazar la vida. ¿Dónde estamos parados hoy? ¿Cuál es el punto de partida de mi reflexión en este día? El mundo hoy, más que nunca, asiste a problemas como aumentos de guerras, aumento de violencia ciudadana, violencia intrafamiliar y doméstica contra niños, niñas, mujeres, ancianos, aumento del narcotráfico, el consumo problemático de drogas, aumento de las patologías de salud mental, ansiedad, estrés, depresión, suicidio, aumento de los problemas de inmigración forzada y también de indocumentados. El mundo hoy se presenta con este panorama, pero lejos de ser solamente una visión oscura, puede ser una visión esperanzada. Estamos llamados a trabajar en un campo fértil, en una tierra promisoria, donde la logoterapia puede aportar a que el ser humano no solamente encuentre su sentido de vida, sino que pueda renovar sus ganas de vivir. Pero, ¿cómo podría ayudar un logoterapeuta? ¿Cómo podría ayudar la logoterapia en este tiempo? La logoterapia es una escuela que está abierta a su propia evolución. Esto quiere decir que permanentemente la logoterapia va recibiendo el aporte de otras escuelas, como también ella misma colabora con otras escuelas para dar respuesta a las preguntas de este tiempo. La logoterapia, como ninguna otra corriente, aporta una idea de ser humano de unidad en lo múltiple. El ser humano es un cuerpo, es una psiquis, es un nudo de relaciones, pero fundamentalmente es expresión de un espíritu que nunca enferma. La logoterapia es cooperadora, es ciencia, es sabiduría, es técnica, es arte, es creatividad, es improvisación. La logoterapia es encuentro, es un misterio. La logoterapia no es dogma, ni tampoco es ortodoxia. Con Viktor Frankl y su experiencia en los campos de concentración, hemos aprendido a través del hombre en busca de sentido que la huida al interior significó la salvación para muchos prisioneros. De aquí es importante comenzar a tener en cuenta que el cultivo de lo interior puede ayudarnos a reconocer lo que nos habita y poder salir desde lo mejor de nosotros hacia el mundo que nos espera. ¿Cómo podríamos ayudar a cultivar lo interior? La logoterapia es una psicoterapia preventiva. Es una psicoterapia que cree en lo profundo del ser humano. La logoterapia tiene fe en lo que habita en el interior del ser humano. Entonces es importante reconocer en el ser humano que está viviendo sus dificultades, sus patologías, pero también debemos saber ignorarlas y poder concentrarnos en los aspectos saludables de la persona, en ese espíritu que nunca enferma, en los recursos que hay en el interior de cada persona para poder ponerlos en juego y poder dar respuestas de modo personal y comunitario. Nuestro trabajo como logoterapeutas es el trabajo de un oftalmólogo. Es una persona que no receta, que no prescribe, sino que solamente ayuda a poder ampliar el campo de visión. Ayudar a que la persona pueda ver el cuadro de su vida. Vivir es un arte. Y para practicar el arte de vivir es necesario activar la gana de vivir, el deseo de vivir. Cuando la persona comienza a reflexionar sobre su existencia, empieza a ver que no solamente hay dificultades, sino que también hay oportunidades. El logoterapeuta puede ayudar a cultivar espacios de cultivo de lo interior, ayudándole a la persona a saber que puede darle respuestas a la pregunta que la vida les hace. El logoterapeuta puede ayudar a que la persona vea los valores, vuelva a recuperar las ganas de reír, pueda amarse, amar y amar aquello que lo trasciende. Que la persona pueda perdonarse, perdonar y descubrir que a veces es necesario pedir perdón. La logoterapia y el logoterapeuta ayudan a descubrir y encontrar sentidos, a poder transformarse y a poder ver en la muerte la posibilidad de abrazar la vida y al mismo tiempo pensar a qué cosas tengo que morir hoy. qué cosas tengo que soltar y dejar ir. Para eso, hace muchos años, año 2007, presenté a la comunidad logoterapéutica un esquema, guía, llamado Brújula de Orientación Existencial. Este esquema con forma de mandala permite a la persona ver todas las áreas de su vida, pudiendo ver cómo va caminando su existencia y reflexionando sobre su modo o experiencia de ser familia, su modo o experiencia de ser pareja, su modo o experiencia de trabajar, de estudiar, de encontrarse con amigos, de practicar deportes y de cuidar su salud. El logoterapeuta puede ayudar a que la persona pueda trabajar en el cultivo de su vida interior, a trabajar por un estilo de vida saludable, a trabajar por el cultivo de emociones positivas, conociendo, aprendiendo y transformándose de las emociones negativas. También trabajar por una espiritualidad saludable que se compromete en el cotidiano vivir. Considero que es importante entonces estar atento a los tiempos para cultivar el alma. La temporalidad es un valor que cuando nosotros la captamos y la descubrimos puede ser una fuente de sentido. Como decía San Agustín, debemos tener memoria para conservar el pasado y también, al mismo tiempo, atención para vivir el presente, sin olvidar la esperanza para construir el futuro. Como lo han manifestado voces ancestrales de pueblos indígenas, voy comprendiendo que el camino al corazón puede ser uno de los mejores caminos para motivar la búsqueda y el encuentro con el sentido de nuestra vida. La huida al interior, en muchas oportunidades, lejos de ser un aislamiento, puede salvarnos la vida. Allí, en nuestro interior, habita un interlocutor válido, una voz amiga, que si la escuchamos atentamente, como un susurro eterno, nos impulsa a salir confiados desde lo mejor de nosotros hacia el encuentro con otros en una vida saludable y de auténtica autotrascendencia. Quiero agradecerles su presencia, su atención y desear que vivan una vida plena de sentido y que pronto nos volvamos a encontrar. Thank you for much.
Thank you for much.
Thank you so much, Andres. I hope the translation was. Let me
Thank you so much.
let me mute my own computer here. Thank you, Andres. That was wonderful, and I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. Tom, would you like to take over? Share your screen.
I shall. Let's see here. Oh, I didn't need to do that. Excuse me. Is this yours or mine? Clicking on share screen. I am looking at guess I have to go into my system preferences here. I apologize for that. Because
It can be a little confusing, all the choices.
Yeah, I am
when
sorry.
when share screen pops up, it can be confusing.
What I saw when I clicked on share screen was some inputs that looked like they were your inputs. That's what I was trying to figure out, what I had done wrong. And so I'm looking at desktop, whiteboard, iPhone 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and so forth, preview and finder. When I click on something, it's asking me to open, obviously, to open my system preferences, and then there we go, Zoom. Let's see what happens with that. Okay. Once again, there we go. Can you see it?
Looks great, Tom. Looks great.
Okay. Sorry about that. Shall we begin? So again, thank you for the opportunity to share. My name is Tom Edmondson. I am a pastor in a small church in the Atlanta area, as was mentioned. I do my best to integrate logotherapy and existential analysis into my practice of pastoral care. And because of this, I have a particular fondness for Frankl's book, Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning. I assume that most of you have read it, and you know that the thesis statement in the book is stated as follows: there is a religious sense deeply rooted in each and every man's unconscious depths. And if you have read the book, you know that thesis statement is unpacked chapter by chapter as you go through the book. The discussion of the spiritual unconscious, intuition, artistic creativity, dreams, and the conscience. While we may briefly define logotherapy as therapy through meaning, Frankl was also clear that logotherapy and existential analysis is a spiritual therapy. Not spiritual in a religious sense, but as in recognizing the human spirit as the dimension of human nature that seeks meaning in life. So generally, Frankl's writings have left theology, or I would like to say revealed theology and religion to the pastors, the priests, the rabbis, and so on. But in this particular book, he addresses religion and spirituality and transcendence in the course of discussing conscience, dreams, creativity, and ultimate meaning that spring from the human noetic realm. These discussions include examples of people who experienced neurotic or psychotic disturbances, but still had access, though sometimes severely limited, to their noetic cores. It was this connection to the transcendent via their noetic cores that, despite their physical or mental or psychological limitations, they were still allowed to express creative, experiential, and attitudinal values, cope with their disorders, or achieve a certain level of healing. So returning to this thesis statement in this book, Frankl added a corollary statement which reads as follows: may break through unexpectedly, even in cases of severe mental illness, such as psychoses. This is a point that is repeated also in his 1985 Oscar Pfister Award lecture, which is included, as you probably know, in the English edition of this book. And in that book, he also makes this statement, or in that lecture: in a book of mine, The Will to Meaning, I describe the case of a severe manic phase. In other books of mine, a patient suffering from an endogenous depression, another patient suffering from schizophrenia. All of them show an indestructible and indelible sense of religiousness. Thus, we can see that from beginning to end, in the English edition of Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, plus its supplementary materials, Frankl's presentation of evidence for the existence of an inner religious sense is reinforced with examples that include people who suffer from neurosis or psychosis. In this paper, then, I'm going to present 6 statements that I have culled from the following books and essays. Man's Search for Meaning, obviously, or Ultimate Meaning, On the Theory and Therapy of Mental Disorders, The Will to Meaning, and of course, an essay from Psychotherapy and Existentialism entitled Psychotherapy, Art, and Religion. These 6 statements, I'm going to call them theses, express Frankl's conviction that though hindered by illness of the body or the mind, there is an uninjured human spirit. And in these 6 examples, particularly, it is religion or spirituality that was the bridge to that noetic healing or that adoption of attitudinal values for unalterable situations. So, we have already read the first thesis from Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, but let me give you the full thesis for the purpose of this paper. There is a religious sense deeply rooted in each and every man's unconscious depths. This sense may break through unexpectedly, even in cases of severe mental illness, such as psychoses. So this inclusion of the second half of that statement, may break through unexpectedly, even in cases of psychosis. It reminds us that it is often the experience of a neurosis or a psychosis that brings us to an awareness of our unconscious or even our repressed spirituality. The fact that it breaks through, even when it does so unexpectedly, served in Frankl's writings as phenomenological proof of the existence of this inner religious sense that is grounded within the human spirit. So this first thesis then speaks to the fact that behind the psychosis or the neurosis, there is this uninjured human spirit that is to be uncovered or activated in the healing process. And this is the stated purpose for the practice of existential analysis, as he wrote also in the on the theory and therapy of mental disorders. And I quote, "Existential analysis awakens a humanity that is uninjured and is incapable of being injured. Existential analysis tries to teach us how to make this visible, even through the veil of neurotic derangement and psychotic madness." Each of the theses that I present in this paper, in this presentation today, adds a nuance to this exploration of accessing the human spirit when working with people who may have a neurosis or a psychosis. Thesis 2 comes from Frankl's essay, Psychology, Art, and Religion. This example is also occurs in Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, but this is the earlier and longer version of it. And in it, we learned that the presenting issue was neurotic behavior and artistic frustration. It's about a woman who could not paint, but it was only during the course of her treatment that the real issue emerged. And I quote, "The patient was struggling for 2 things, her work and God. The religious problem was not apparent in the beginning of the treatment, but spontaneously broke through in its own course." As you can see through my highlighting and underlining there, that this phraseology keeps occurring throughout his writings about this sense breaking through in spite of. Okay, so this leads directly into the second thesis, which states, psychotherapy handled correctly will release a patient's religiosity. Even if that religiosity was dormant, its release was not at all intended by the therapist. Because Frankl believed the inner religious sense is a human characteristic, a strength rather than a crutch, he was able to recognize it as such with this artist and was able to help her find healing and meaning through her time of struggles. But we could also imagine that if she had visited another therapist whose worldview did not include the spiritual as a component of human nature, that perhaps such a therapist might have considered the religious sense the problem rather than its cure, if that makes sense. The next three theses, actually four, 3 through 6, are drawn from the book, The Will to Meaning, from the chapter entitled Medical Ministry. Frankl's discussion of Joan of Arc in this chapter kind of sets up the scene for us nicely. I apologize for the long quote, but I think it's relevant here. There's no doubt that from the psychiatric point of view, the saint would have had to be diagnosed as a case of schizophrenia. And as long as we confine ourselves to the psychiatric frame of reference, Joan of Arc is nothing but a schizophrenic. What she is beyond a schizophrenic is not perceptible within the psychiatric dimension. As soon as we follow her into the noological dimension and observe her theological and historical importance, it turns out that Joan of Arc is more than a schizophrenic. The fact of her being a schizophrenic in the dimension of psychiatry does not in the least detract from her significance in other dimensions, and vice versa. If we took it for granted that she was a saint, this would not change the fact that she was also a schizophrenic. I love that example, and it gives us a lot of hope. And so from this example, it's easy to see then the logic of the third thesis that I have identified. One is not justified in assuming that a neurosis or psychosis must be detrimental to the religious life of the patient. It need not be a handicap, but may well be a challenge and stimulus which triggers a religious response. Even if a neurosis that drives a person to religion, even if it is a neurosis that drives a person to religion, religion may become genuine in the long run and finally help the person to overcome the neurosis. It is therefore not justified a priori to exclude people with neurotic traits from the theological profession. So the primary example that Frankl used to illustrate this third thesis was of a Carmelite nun who was struggling with depression. She had the further burden that her superiors shamed her, saying, "You're a nun, you shouldn't be depressed." She saw Frankl, and Frankl helped her to overcome this by suggesting quite the opposite. What he suggested to her was, perhaps the fact that you are a Carmelite nun makes you supremely able to handle this depression, and that she could only she could master the depression in the admirable way that she did. In so doing, he appealed to her inner noetic self to find meaning in her suffering, which relieved her of the guilt that she was feeling. And this also illustrates how, from my point of view, a person's spiritual core could be the source of noological distress or noogenic distress, but could also be the source of the cure or a noogenic healing. This leads logically to thesis number 4. People need not become bad monks and nuns because of a neurosis, but may well become good monks and nuns despite it. In some cases, they even become good monks and nuns because of a neurosis. The neurosis, in Frankl's view, did nothing to minimize the Carmelite sister's value as a nun. Rather, it offered her the ability to be a good or maybe even a better nun because of it. So on a more basic level, it could be said that a neurosis does not make a person morally good or bad. As Frankl wrote in The Unheard Cry for Meaning, time and again, we psychiatrists meet patients whose response to their delusions is anything but pathological. I have met paranoiacs who, out of their delusional ideas of persecution, have killed their alleged enemies, but I have also met paranoiacs who have forgiven their supposed adversaries. The latter have not acted out of mental illness, but rather reacted to this illness out of their humanness. Values extend from a person's noetic core and may break through despite a neurosis or a psychosis. Similarly, mental illness does not keep one from knowing and speaking the truth, or as Frankl wrote on several occasions, 2 times 2 = 4, even if a paranoiac says so. Again, this is based on the idea that behind the psychosis or the neurosis is an uninjured noetic core, which is also home to the inner religious sense. Now for thesis 5. Neurosis is not necessarily detrimental to religion. The neurotic may be religious, either despite or because of being neurotic. This fact reflects the independence and authenticity of religion. To all appearances, religion is indestructible and indelible. Even psychosis cannot destroy it. Frankl further illustrated this with the story of a man in his 60s who had suffered from auditory hallucinations, which I think means schizophrenia. Human opinion of this man was not high. Frankl wrote, "I was facing a ruined personality. Everyone in his environment regarded him as an idiot." He had wanted to be a priest when he was young, but obviously he was not able to do so. He was in the care of his sister, and his religious service was limited to only singing in the choir. Because of his mental condition, he often became easily excitable, but was able to regain self-control. When Frankl asked him for whom he was calming himself, he replied, "For God's sake." Even the ability to cope with one's own mental disorder, in other words, can be aided by an appeal to the inner religious sense. Which now leads us to the 6th and final thesis, and I think it serves as a nice summary. And I quote, "Taking religion seriously allows for drawing upon the spiritual resources of the patient. In this context, spiritual means uniquely and truly human. This drives home the point that, again, behind every illness is an uninjured spirit, where the patient can choose to exercise freedom and responsibleness. Thus, diseases of the body and the mind, tragic though they are, ultimately do not have to control how a person responds to them." So now, here's the question. What can pastors, priests, rabbis, and others who serve a religious or spiritual community gain from this information? Well, I obviously will not attempt a full discussion of this today, but I will suggest a few possible answers. First, those of us who are members of the clergy who integrate logotherapy and existential analysis into pastoral care, we recognize that we are not medical doctors and we are not psychiatrists. Therefore, we are not suited to treat people who are experiencing psychosis, but we can minister to them. Frankl's statements about the inner religious sense breaking through even in spite of psychosis can be a guide for helping us in our ministry to them. Thus, when ministering to people experiencing psychosis, like any logotherapist, we should seek to connect with them via their noetic core. I have a few anecdotal examples I'd like to finish with, if I may. The first one comes from my grandmother. At the end of her life, my grandmother was in home hospice care, and she was on morphine, which caused her to fall ultimately into a morphine-induced delirium. Now, again, I'm not a medical doctor. Is this a psychosis? I don't know, but I can't tell you the difference between a heart attack and a panic attack either. So whatever the case may be, we have a delirium that is brought on, at least by morphine. My grandmother's sense of reality was fragmented. She was here, and then she was not here. She was in various stages of her childhood, and she expressed that in very colorful, but also very sporadic ways in her conversation. And the bottom line is she was not experiencing reality the way the rest of us were. One night, shortly before she died, as we were sitting at her bedside, she recounted disparate memories and stories from across her lifespan. At times, she seemed like a child, and at times, she seemed a little bit more like an adult. But what was most amazing about that experience is that she sang hymns, old hymns like Amazing Grace and Precious Memories. And what is so amazing about that is she sang every word and every note from beginning to end. So despite her delirium, where she could not think or speak in a coherent or linear fashion, she was able to recall the hymns of her faith and sing them verbatim. As I see it, though her mind and body were failing, her noetic core was indeed intact, and demonstrated this by her religious sense coming through, despite, again, the fog of the morphine-induced delirium. Two more quick examples. One Wednesday evening, a young man entered our church building, and we were here, and went directly to the sanctuary. He was looking for help. His speech was hard to follow, but we finally made out that he had been wandering around town all day long, and he was off his medication and could not figure out how to tell his caretaker how to find him. Luckily, he had his cell phone with him, and I was able to speak to his caretaker, and within 30 minutes, the caretaker arrived to pick him up. Given the circumstances, I didn't ask, what the diagnosis was or what was going on, but assumed that he was bipolar or some such thing, and he had gotten off his medication. The point of this anecdote is to share what I observed as we were waiting for his ride to arrive. Like the example Frankl told of the man who was in his 60s who calmed himself for God's sake, this young man would become agitated when we were not speaking to him. What did he do when he became agitated? He began speaking to himself, and he alternated between John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, and then he would say a prayer, God have mercy on me, a sinner. And he just went back and forth between each one of those two things. And of course, we would speak to him and he would be calm, and eventually his caretaker arrived. But again, it seemed to me that this young man was also calming himself for God's sake. Finally, this is an observation. There's a lady in our congregation whose family has a history of Alzheimer's. Her only living relative died about a year ago of Alzheimer's, and she has now developed the same symptoms. She has become to where she does not speak anymore. And then her husband was able to get her some medication that makes her able to respond in very short sentences to questions like, how are you? And she'll say, fine, or whatever. But I noticed as we recite the Lord's Prayer together in worship, that she says the entire prayer from beginning to end. And once again, though she is unable to put together words in conversation, she is able to reach into her noetic core and draw out those words of prayer. If a person's inner religious sense can be accessed despite psychotic issues, how much more effective can it be when ministering to people experiencing noogenic neuroses or other existential issues? Clergy, no less than medical doctors, deal with real human hurts. Pastoral logotherapy can be practiced in a one-on-one or group counseling setting, but it often occurs in places like hospital rooms, social gatherings, Bible studies, sermons, and impromptu encounters. Further, a priest, a rabbi, an imam, a shaman, or preacher is, by virtue of his or her vocation, a representative of religion, spirituality, and the transcendent. Therefore, effective implementation of logotherapy in the pastoral setting includes helping the person find the meaning of their lives through the usual means, maieutic questioning, de-reflection, paradoxical intent, and so on, but also with the corollary that religion or spirituality is part of the discussion. Our examination of these 6 theses drawn from Frankl's writings undergirds the fact that accessing the inner religious spiritual sense within the seeker is a pathway to healing or a positive attitudinal change for living with unalterable circumstances. Thank you for listening, and I just draw quick attention. There's a book cover, and I have a website. I would love for you to visit meaningandministry.com. And then what it is hopefully a place where we can share information on what works. And finally, I invite you to send me an email if you like. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Andres. Let me pull into chat here. Are there any questions or comments?
I do have one. Hi, everybody. Tom, wonderful presentation. Also, Andres. I know Tom because he's now one of my students taking one of our courses here at the Viktor Frankl Institute in preparation for getting his academic associate in noetic care and counseling. He is as you know, a graduate of the Graduate Theological Foundation, where I'm also on the faculty. So we have a relationship with the Graduate Theological Foundation and students who take courses there in the Pastoral Logotherapy program, which was founded, by the way, by Dr. Ann Graber, one of our members and former faculty, can also achieve their diplomate in logotherapy from our institute and this academic associate in noetic care and counseling, which is specifically designed for students from there. But Tom, I wanted to ask you a question I had not thought of asking before. And that is, before you read Man's Search for Meaning or learned about logotherapy, do you think that now that you have studied Viktor Frankl and it's clear you use him in your therapy, how has it in your counseling with your congregants and so on, and walking through the hospital, meeting patients, how has it, do you think, enhanced your work as a pastoral minister?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a great question. And the truth is, I've throughout undergrad and course of my life, I had taken courses in counseling and so forth. And then, Bowen family systems therapy is very popular among a lot of ministries. And I took a course in that. I took a few other courses in various things, but none of them satisfied me for a lot of reasons. And one of them is, I think, just philosophically, they didn't quite gel with what I believe to be true about humanity and about how that, that works hand in glove with theology or whatnot. I don't mean to be vague about that, but I'll say this too. There are a lot of CPE programs that teach all kinds of counseling and psychological methods, but don't have a spiritual oriented worldview such as logotherapy. Now, having, I read Man's Search for Meaning 20, 30 years ago and took it to heart, but I didn't pursue it further until things happened in my life or ministry that kind of forced me to think back. Oh, that makes me think about Man's Search for Meaning. And, doing a funeral for a family whose son had been murdered. How do you find the meaning in that situation? Doing a funeral for a family who had twin sons that ended their lives by suicide 4 years apart. Going through my own struggles and trying to make sense of my life. And so as I got deeper into reading Frankl, and especially for me, Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, it just seemed like that particular approach made sense on every level. It not only dealt with the physical and the mental, but it showed us how to draw from the inner spiritual resources, which is not something that I had learned from any other approach.
Thanks. I'm going to ask the same question of Andres. Before you understood about Viktor Frankl, how has knowing Viktor Frankl's theory and so on enhanced your work and the things that you do to help others?
Andres, that question is for you. Did you hear the question?
Thank you, Ann María. Gracias por tu pregunta. Thank you for question. La logoterapia está abierta a su propia evolución. Y yo como persona, como profesional de la psicología, también estoy abierto permanentemente creando mi modo de ser también un psicoterapeuta, tratando de responder a las preguntas que la vida nos hace hoy, aquí y ahora, tanto para trabajar a nivel personal como comunitario, y poder juntos, trabajando el arte de vivir, como una forma de ir escribiendo juntos esta historia presente, comprometidos en este presente, en este tiempo que nos toca vivir. Trato de trabajar en los aspectos saludables de la persona, trato de trabajar en el desarrollo de sus recursos personales, la creatividad, el amor, el humor, los valores, la capacidad de respuesta a la vida, así como también el trabajo del vínculo con la naturaleza. Hace muchos años estoy trabajando en la relación que el ser humano tiene con la naturaleza y la naturaleza con el ser humano, y poder descubrir que ella es nosotros y nosotros somos ella. Tener una conciencia medioambiental, tanto externa como interna. Hacer dialogar esos dos mundos, el mundo interno con el mundo externo y el mundo externo con el mundo interno coherentemente. La logoterapia para mí es un desafío apasionante. La logoterapia para mí es una fuerza que me invita día a día a buscar mi propio sentido de vida y ayudar a otros también a encontrarlos, tratando de ser coherente entre lo que pienso y siento, mi mundo interno, y lo que digo y hago, mi mundo externo. Entonces, con meditaciones, con pintura, con música, con escritura, con encuentro, el arte de encontrarnos semanalmente, hace más de 23 años que vengo promoviendo lo que se llaman talleres logoterapéuticos de desarrollo personal, pero en grupo, como una forma de trabajar lo personal en encuentro con los otros y recibir la riqueza que el encuentro con los otros nos da a lo personal. En ese diálogo interno y externo es que venimos proponiendo aquí en Uruguay y en América Latina este programa de comunidades de unas 10, 15 personas que se encuentran una vez a la semana a trabajar los temas vinculados a la vida y su sentido. Entonces, todos los años escribo un libro donde preparo más de 30 temas vinculados a la libertad, a la responsabilidad, al amor, al humor, a los valores, y con cuentos, poesías, películas, trabajamos todos estos temas. Muchas gracias por tu pregunta. No sé si está bien respondida.
Gracias.
Y gracias a todos por su comprensión también por mi idioma.
It was very nice, and you'll have to forgive us for our language, Andres, since we're not so good at Spanish either. Andres next, and I put the question in the chat. Next, would you please speak on your experience of having to deal with religious issues in relation to others' values in your teaching and your work with others? And I'll
El trabajo de la logoterapia o el trabajo del logoterapeuta es para todo ser humano, creyente o ateo. El trabajo del logoterapeuta va dirigida a la dimensión espiritual, la dimensión que nunca enferma, la dimensión noética, la dimensión que tiene los recursos para poder responderle a la vida. Entonces, la mejor forma es respetar las creencias religiosas o ateas de cada persona y proponer trabajos que nos unan a todos, creyentes o ateos. Entonces, trabajar los temas de la libertad, de la responsabilidad, del amor, del humor, y trabajar también el compromiso por superar las dificultades de este tiempo presente. Una espiritualidad verdadera es aquella que se compromete en la tierra, es aquella que se compromete en el mundo, en el cotidiano vivir, en tratar de ayudar a evitar las guerras, cultivando la paz y el diálogo, ayudando a trascender la dependencia a drogas químicas, entendiendo que muchas veces las personas que se drogan en realidad están buscando un valor. El gran desafío es cómo ayudarlos a encontrar el valor sin que para eso utilicen la droga. Y por otro lado, ayudar a liberar a la persona a que pueda sanar esa apatía, esa falta de ánimo, porque se han desconectado de la vida. Muchas personas viven en el presente a mirar el pasado y no sueltan el pasado y se deprimen y se entristecen. Otras personas miran solo el futuro y se ponen ansiosas. La idea es ayudar a que las personas puedan hacer conciencia de este presente, de este aquí, de este ahora, de esta manera de estar como estoy ahora con ustedes, disfrutando de este encuentro y aprendiendo con lo que Tom nos pudo presentar y con la colaboración de Charles, que también está haciendo autotrascendencia al ayudarnos en la parte técnica.
Hermosa respuesta, Andres. Beautiful answer. Thank you. Tom, I'd like to turn the same question to you. And you as a minister coming at this from a different direction. But can you follow up with the same question?
Absolutely. And just to sort of begin answering the question, I do hope that the presentation that I just made in itself did not come across as overly partisan, in the sense that I tried to address it to, spirit leaders of all kinds of spiritual communities, not just Christian or whatever.
Well, let me interject by saying, by keeping it in the language of Frankl, I think you minimized that.
Yes.
You used Frankl's words and put them together in a new way for us. So that's my interpretation of it. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's the goal. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the approach when speaking to people. Now, obviously, if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, pastor, you're my pastor," or whatever, then obviously that's clear. But I don't just interact with members of my congregation. I interact with people in our community. And I co-founded a community organization here with a Jewish lady. And we spent many hours talking, and it wasn't about what do you believe and what I believe. We worked for the good of the community. When she died, I performed her funeral, and she was Jewish, her husband was Catholic, and their family is pretty much almost like 50-50 both. So we worked that out, and the meaning is the way I understand logotherapy, existential analysis, and so on is we operate at a human level. And even theologically, when Frankl writes and speaks theologically, he doesn't push any religion, including his own. What I think he does, and I said this in my paper, I think, is he speaks at the level of natural religion, not revealed religion. Revealed religion is where you say, my religion is, whatever. But the religious sense, and this is just who we are as human beings, I think it's actually tacky to use counseling or theology counseling or psychology as a way of trying to push people in that direction. If it's not their decision, it's not their decision. So, and as another analogy, sorry to kind of talk in circles, but when a couple, comes to me and asks for a wedding, if I don't know them well, or if they're not in the church, one of the first questions I ask them is, do you want a Christian wedding or do you want a civil wedding? So to me, there's a difference, and that is, do you guys just want to get married and you need somebody with the authority to do that, or is this between you and God? So I try to take that approach to anything I do in life, including psychology or counseling or whatnot. It's there. But I also acknowledge that you can be an atheist and practice logotherapy, and you can be spiritual. So I hope I've answered your question. We went around the garden path, I think.
I think you answered it quite directly, and that
Okay. Thanks.
you gave examples of how you honor people's values. Thank you. What other questions do we have? I can play the Jeopardy theme if that will help people come up with questions.
If I may, the website that I have listed there, that what that is a place for me to share things that I've learned, but I'm also sharing things from other people. So, as an example, there's a gentleman in Europe. His name is spelled Heye, and his last name is spelled Heyen. And my German is not good, so at least I think his name is Dr. Hayen, but he's also a minister. He is a logotherapist, but he teaches at the I think it's called the Protestant Theological Faculty, which is in Brussels. And on his website, he had a number of articles that he had written or papers he had written that relate to pastoral care and logotherapy. So I got in touch with him, and we worked out English translations of 3 of those papers, and those are posted on my website. I recently did an interview with Dr. Ann Graber, and that's also available on the website. So it's not, hey, look at me, look at what I'm doing, but rather, what can we learn from each other and share? And I'm asking for people from all different spiritual backgrounds to share what they're doing. So I'd love to get the word out about that.
Tom and Andres, 2 questions. Have you put your slides up in the conference site for people to access? And the other thing is, Tom, if you would put your website address in the chat, people can access that right away. Also, your contact information. Also, Andres, I'll put this in the chat directly to you. But if you could put if you would like for us to contact you, if you would put your email address in the chat for us, we'd appreciate it. I'm sorry, I don't know Spanish.
I'll raise a question.
Marshall, please.
I'm just curious in terms of 2 different corners of the world here. 2023, coming out of the pandemic, having what appears to be increasing violence in the world. Have either of you noticed from your perspectives any differences or changes in the kinds of questions people come to you with as they search for meaning? Has it changed any? Is it about the same? What do you notice from different parts of the world?
That's a tough question to answer, of course. I would say that I think that what I'm observing is that there's just a tremendous cynical reaction to everything that's going on in terms of, the general population. With churches are declining in size and around the world, and I think a lot of it is because people blame us for things that are going on in the world. But yeah, I don't know that I can say that the questions have changed here. Now, I'm in the Southeast. I think you're in the Midwest, if I'm right.
I am, yes. I'm in Kansas.
Okay.
Gracias por la pregunta, Marshall. Thank you for question. Creo que la pandemia fue una pregunta que la vida nos hizo al mundo todo y a las diferentes culturas y comunidades de cómo pudieron responder a esa situación. En esos momentos hubo un reconocimiento humanitario al personal de salud, a las personas que se exponían ayudando a otros y los que podían ayudar hasta económicamente a personas que quedaban sin empleo, a personas que quedaban sin alimento. Fue un gran desafío en ese momento que permitió que el ser humano pudiera dar una respuesta. Este tiempo post pandemia es otro tiempo. Es un tiempo en el que la vida nos habla y nos presenta una situación que, como esa frase tan popular en logoterapia, debemos responder. En la vida no es lo que pasa, sino lo que nosotros hacemos con lo que pasa. En la vida es la respuesta que nosotros tomamos, la actitud que nosotros tomamos ante lo que pasa. Y esta situación post pandemia de aumento de guerra, de violencia, de aumento de consumos de drogas, de aumento de inmigrantes en el mundo, personas desplazadas de sus países, son grandes preguntas que la vida nos hace hoy en esta etapa post pandemia. Entonces las preguntas hoy serán, ¿qué podemos hacer ante estas situaciones y qué es lo que podemos aportar como persona y como comunidad?
Would someone kindly translate that? Unfortunately, the wordly did not work correctly.
I noticed that. That's very interesting.
I think the word,
gracias, Andreas.
gracias.
Muchas gracias.
I think
muy bueno tu español, Marshall.
No, muy poco.
I think that wordly looks at the first word spoken and uses that for the rest of the translation. And so it kept it thinking it was in English. It translated it perfectly into Spanish.
I can cut and paste it maybe.
I tried. I can't cut it out of the browser.
Oh.
I can translate what he just said.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm from Spain, but I lived in the United States many years. So what he said is the concept of what we lived during the pandemic and what the needs we had and what we, all the struggling that we had, it's past. Now we are kind of undergoing a different status, I guess. But we had something from that, which is substance abuse, depression, and many other, very difficult bad things. I will add, because I was doing my thesis in logotherapy, philosophy and logotherapy, and my thesis was about suicide and logotherapy. And I would say, yeah, that's suicide has increased a lot, and substance abuses, and even abuse between or among people. That's what he said. So what we have to do is basically understand the situation is not the pandemic anymore. The pandemic is past. We need to understand that we are living in a new world, and we need to kind of get used to this world and put in everything that we can together, but live the past somehow.
Muy bueno. Muy bueno.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Are there other questions? Well, I think it's a good time to wrap up. Thank you, both of you. Again, to those who entered after we began, I encourage you to watch Shimon Cowen, the Rabbi Shimon Cowen's presentation, which is played on Thursday. It's available already as a recording on the last thing during the day on Thursday. And that fits in to this beautifully. And I'm sorry that because of his religion, he was not able to present today, and we're not able to show the recording of it today. So anyway, if you would like to follow up with that, that'll be great. I am honored to have been the moderator for both of you, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you. So coming up next is the Diplomate Colloquium, and those who have earned their diplomates over the last 2 years have the opportunity to present their projects. And usually there's a tremendous variety, but also an enthusiasm and energy and new ideas that come forth during these colloquia. So I encourage you to participate. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Charles. Gracias a ti por el trabajo técnico. Gracias a Tom por lo que nos aportó y lo que nos enseñó con su conferencia. Gracias a todas las personas que participaron, y quiero desearles a ustedes y a sus seres queridos un tiempo de salud física, mental, vincular, pero fundamentalmente espiritual, pleno de sentido de vida. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Andrés. Dios te bendiga. To everyone else, thank you so much for your participation, and blessings to you all.
Gracias. Thank you.